It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, coming to you live from our studio in Seoul. This is Daniel Chef Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. President Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump held their third bilateral summit since taking office, but it's the first one here in South Korea. For details, let's go straight to our chief Blue House correspondent, Moon Gun-young. Gun-young, what's new?
Well, the South Korea-U.S. alliance, North Korea's nuclear threat, and Korea-U.S. free trade agreement. Now, all three topics were thoroughly discussed during the bilateral summit between Presidents Moon and Trump. Now, first on North Korea, South Korean President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Donald Trump echoed in one voice that North Korea needs to curb its nuclear and missile development immediately and that it should come out to the negotiations table. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump said that he's ready to use all military process or military power that U.S. has, unparalleled to any other country, in order to curb North Korea's threats. But notice the tone, the difference in tone of Mr. Trump's language. He said that he is ready to use all available tools short of military action. Now, that's a score for President Moon, as he has been an advocate of peaceful resolution for North Korea's for the North Korean issue. So there has been that difference in tone, but both did try to pressure China and Russia and all other responsible nations to join in South Korea-U.S. efforts to pressure and sanction North Korea so that it could come out to the negotiations table and talk with the rest of the world. Now, second, the South Korea-U.S. alliance. Many times the two leaders underscored how strong, how ironclad committed the two sides are on their decades-long South Korea-U.S. alliance. And one part of strengthening or further developing this alliance would be the U.S.'s agreement to lifting the warhead payload limits on South Korea's ballistic missiles. Now, also, the U.S. will work towards South Korea building more defense power by deploying surveillance assets here, and it will also aid in South Korea's defense capabilities through acquisition or development of advanced weapon systems, and that includes nuclear-powered submarines. So that's another point that they made during this bilateral summit. The military burden sharing, the cost sharing of U.S. forces in South Korea will also be divided between the two sides at reasonable levels. They didn't exactly define reasonable levels, but that's what the two leaders agreed on through this summit. Daniel.
Now, what about trade? It seemed to be the biggest thing on Trump's mind. On a number of occasions, he expressed his discontent with the South Korea-U.S. free trade agreements.
Well, sure. Mr. Trump made sure that the trade issue was discussed during this bilateral summit and the expanded summit. Both leaders have agreed to expedite the process of renegotiating the five-year-old free trade agreement between the two sides. It's an accord that President Donald Trump today at the joint news conference called an agreement that's both unsuccessful and not good for the United States. So they have agreed to make adjustments to that. Now, Mr. Trump also said that South Korea has agreed to purchase billions of dollars of military equipment from the U.S.
All right, let's look ahead, Gun-young. What's next for America's first couple during their two-day state visit to South Korea?
Well, so after a short break after the joint news conference, Mr. Moon and Mrs. Moon, or Mr. Moon and First Lady Kim Jong-suk, are hosting a grand feat
The official welcoming ceremony for the first sitting U.S. president to make a state visit to South Korea in 25 years was held with all the formalities and conventions of a state visit, displaying the highest honor and courtesy, and also featuring both the traditional and modern sides of South Korea. U.S. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump entered the Blue House on Tuesday afternoon, their cavalcade surrounded by traditional ceremonial guards. A guard of honor and a military band made up of approximately 300 soldiers from South Korean forces, a group of school children, and the first couple of South Korea greeted the U.S. President and the First Lady. And instead of any other ordinary march, the official presidential anthem of the U.S., Hail to the Chief, was played in honor of President Trump as the two presidents entered the Cheongwade grounds. And Mr. President, a song dedicated to President Moon, was played upon their exit from the field after they inspected the troops as part of the welcoming ceremony. President Trump was not shy about expressing how much he was impressed. The U.S. first couple left a message in the guest book that read, quote, "This is such a great honor. Thank you," before entering the main building of the Blue House for the bilateral summit.
Get more beautiful than that. I know the work that was put into it.
The two heads of state also enjoyed a promenade through the Blue House garden and spared some time to enjoy a cup of tea before their much-anticipated joint press conference. Considering President Trump is also the first head of state to visit South Korea since President Moon's inauguration and a delicate time involving the alliance between Seoul and Washington, observers say the welcoming ceremony
his South Korean counterpart was already there waiting to give a surprise welcome and setting a positive tone ahead of the summit talks. Kwon Jang-ho fills us in on the starting point of Trump's trip in the nation.
Rolled out for U.S. President Donald Trump as he made his first visit to the Korean Peninsula. Several U.S. presidents have visited South Korea in recent years, but this was the first formal state visit in 25 years since George Bush Sr. Official requirements of a state visit meant Trump was greeted with a guard of honor, a 21-gun salute, and a senior minister, in this case Kang Kyung-hwa, the foreign minister. He then promptly boarded his Marine One helicopter, brought in from America, and flew to a U.S. military base, Camp Humphreys, for his first stop in Korea. There, he was greeted by President Moon Jae-in in a previously unannounced change in schedule to give a surprise welcome to the American leader. There have been question marks over how well the two presidents get along, and this move was seen as a deliberate gesture of goodwill to try and address this. And it seemed to have worked. Trump looked jovial as he sat down to eat with Moon Jae-in and the US and Korean troops in the military canteen, cracking jokes and smiling.
Well, I had a choice of having a beautiful, very fancy lunch, and I said, no, I want to eat with the troops, and we ate with the troops. It was good eating. It was good eating.
Camp Humphreys has a special significance to South Korea and the US, as it's the biggest overseas US base, costing $10.7 billion, of which 92% was funded by South Korea. A presidential spokesperson said the base represents the strength of the alliance, and President Moon took the time to thank the US forces.
어려울 때 진정한 친구를 알 수 있다고 합니다. 여러분은 우리 대한민국이 가장 어려울 때 함께 피 흘린 진정한 친구입니다. 여러분은 우리 한미동맹의 아주 든든한 소식이고 또 한미동맹의 미래입니다.
It was perhaps unusual for the first stop of a state visit to be at a military base, but it seemed to set a positive tone for the start of President Trump's trip before the leaders sat down for more serious discussions. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
And now for a closer analysis of the historic summit held at the Cheongwade today, we turn to Professor Kim Hyun-wook of Korea National Diplomatic Academy, who joins us in the studio today. Professor Kim Hyun-wook, thank you for making time for us again.
Thank you very much.
Such a short last-minute notice. Let's start with the first question. Certainly a positive atmosphere today for the summit talks between the leaders of South Korea and the United States. What stood out was Trump using very positive adjectives. That's always a plus when it comes to the outspoken and at times controversial American leader. He highlighted that Seoul is more than just an ally. An important partner is what he how he framed the relationship. So that's certainly a welcome development on our part, right?
Yeah, I think you have mentioned that he's having a much more positive atmosphere in Seoul than expected. I mean, I think there were, much efforts by two countries for a coordination for this summit meeting, I think, and there have been a lot of adjustment and coordinations between two countries. This is a state visit. I mean, there have been a lot of efforts by Korean government to welcome, President Trump to Korea. Also, President Moon Jae-in joined him in Camp Humphreys when he visited the U.S. bases there, which was not expected. Actually, when he comes to Osan Air Base, he might come to the Camp Humphreys and then come to the presidential office, Blue House, in which the President Moon is supposed to welcome President Trump. But he came to Camp Humphreys before he comes to the Blue House, which I think was a very surprising event for President Trump. And also, I think there would be a National Assembly speech expected tomorrow. So I think many of the events, even though it's a very short period of time, two countries have made a lot of efforts for his visit, I think.
Right, it's a great way to open up the doors and, of course, set the right tone and have it more relaxed and more, I guess, well-receiving of certain comments or feedbacks that at times he might not sometimes be open to. So that's a good job on the part of President Moon Jae-in and the presidential office there. North Korea was, of course, the main topic of interest. How deep do you think the two leaders got to dwell on this particular subject?
Yeah, I think they have, gone very well. They had a summit meeting, and also afterwards the briefings, media briefing. I think two leaders have shown very smooth coordination in their policies towards North Korea. People were kind of expecting Trump to be very hawkish, kind of thinking about the military options. But President Trump mentioned the North Korea policies devoid of military options, and also pretty much same, policies towards North Korea. Sanctions and dialogue is open. Also, there should be no transactions with North Korea, so on and so forth. So it's a very much, toned down approach towards North Korea. In comparison, President Moon's approach was kind of focusing on the peaceful dialogue to deal with North Korea, kind of also establishing peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. So I think, two leaders' policy towards North Korea was very well coordinated. With no Trump making noises about the policies, and also President Moon sticking to his original position, which is peace in the Korean Peninsula and peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. I think it was very successful.
Right, I think it was very successful in the sense that President Moon Jae-in managed to remind and show Trump there's always another way other than the usual and tested, accustomed approach of using force sometimes when the other side don't seem to be responding positively. So that's a definite positive development there as well in the very sensitive topic of North Korean issues. Trump seemed quite fixated on trade, however. He has mentioned time and again that it's a flawed deal, as it's the way he describes most of the trade deals that America has with the rest of the world. No exception here in South Korea. He did try to describe it in a little different fashion this time, tying weapons purchases to improving what he sees as not very reciprocal deal.
Yes, as you have mentioned, his priority in his visit to Asia was economic and trade issues. It was not North Korea issues. It turned out to be that way. When you look at what happened in Japan, even though Prime Minister Abe did so much to please President Trump, well, he got really bad things about the trade issues. I mean, there were very firm statements by President Trump about the, U.S.-Japan trade relations and possible deals for the free trade agreement between two countries, which was a shock to Japan. I mean, even Washington Post article, they said that Japan is a very strategic slave to the United States. It's a very shameful article to Japanese Prime Minister Abe. So I think the same pattern was expected in Korea, but as you have mentioned, free trade issues smoothed away. I mean, they agreed very well, focused that the President Trump wants a very fair and reciprocal free trade agreement between two countries, and President Moon responded that it will be quickly, expedited by two countries, which was fine. And one more issue that satisfied Trump's desire for money happened in the weapon purchase, as you have mentioned. I mean, there were many military, strategic asset purchased by South Korea, U.S. military weapon systems. Also, the nuclear-powered submarine purchase, possibly, the two countries are talking about it. But one thing I'm kind of thinking extra is that, about the wartime option transfer, the U.S. has mentioned to South Korea that South Korean military capabilities is not ready to get the transfer of wartime option from the United States. So I think buying weapon systems from the United States and bolstering the military capability of South Korea, which would enable wartime option transfer, I think this will be definitely a plus to South Korea too.
Could be
so I think a win-win deal, I think.
Opcon transfer has been something that we've been pursuing for a very long time. This could be a stepping stone towards that.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned about Prime Minister Shinzo Abe not having a very successful meeting with President Trump. I guess it's not just what you do, but how it's done and who that gesture is being made to and from whom. Speaking of whom, we have a very big figure that Trump will be meeting President Xi Jinping next in China. Curiosity is quite brimming right now as to what will be covered during the meeting with the Chinese leader. What kind of outcome can we expect, especially when it comes to subjects that's very delicate to South Korea as well and directly affect the South Korean economy and security?
Well, I think, first the two countries will talk about the trade issues and North Korea issues. I mean, now the Trump is ready to, bash China harder, and Xi Jinping now is beginning the second term of his, government. So I think the two countries' leaders would be ready to be assertive towards each other. So I'm kind of, curious what will be, Trump, Xi Jinping's response to Trump's, sanctions and pressure on China. About the South Korea issues, today President Moon mentioned that what he means by balanced diplomacy means not only limited to the balancing between the United States and China, but kind of broadening our relationship, diplomatic relationship with other countries like EU, European countries, Southeast Asian countries, so on and so forth. By broadening our country's relationship, diplomatic relationship with other countries, maybe we can kind of broaden our diplomatic influences, not only on the United States and China, but other countries. So I think in that sense, we are now, trying to change the shape of Northeast Asian power structures, kind of entrapped between the U.S. and China, but now trying to figure out what would be the better ways for our diplomacy.
Right, we can expect some degree of a no-holds-barred approach from both sides when the leaders of the U.S. and China meet next. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Professor Kim Yeon-wook. We appreciate your insights as always.
Thank you very much.
Presidents Moon and Trump will have their state dinner at the Blue House in the next few hours. The dishes have been carefully selected and prepared at the top office. Lee-Ji-won explains what the food and gifts represent.
Suited to both presidents' tastes with harmonized ingredients,